were going to start at 12:45. We're probably going to start closer to, it's going to be 1 o'clock. Maybe just a little bit. Okay. But, you know, and the questions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we got thrown off because the coffee queue was so long early this morning.
It's okay. Lunch wasn't ready, so.
Yep. We'll figure it out.
Such a friendly.
Yes, sorry, this is yeah. Oh yeah, I have no idea what they on it. your time, Leslie. I'm rearranging some other stuff. Yeah. And just to let you know that the college and the backfill, sharing the right to slide. I'll do it and I'll close the back. But I may not need to know if you're ready or I'm really joking. Maybe it's already fixed. But our first floor session is actually in every session. So I will post a video and I can find it. there's a couple of us that were staying in Vermont the summer. We went to a house on the beach. Decompress. I got adjusted to the whatever. We went to Canada. Going home, it was. And I'm switching in a couple days. Days after, 4 days after I get back, I switched to East Coast. So my body's so I'm always normally in Reno. I'm going to visit my nephew in West Virginia. It's college senior night for volleyball. Just a little fun side trip. We'll get started in just 2 minutes. He said this issue is triggered when somebody tries to share slides by mistake. And in this group, of course, it's going to happen. Oh, so he says he has a fix at the end of it. So there's a chance we don't experience it again. Let me make sure we have everything ready. We do have an outline on there, you know that. Yep. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started with session 5. The topic is advanced topics. Before I hand it over to our presenter, if you could please scan that QR code and let us know that you are in this session. Practice makes perfect. We'll give you a couple seconds to do that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Leslie Daigle, who's going to be giving you a lot of fantastic information related to some advanced topics in the IETF.
Great, thank you. So you are here, advanced topics. Almost getting to the close of the day. I'm sure it has been very much like drinking from a fire hose all day today. So I will say that my ambition in this session of advanced topics, which really is all the topics that didn't fit anywhere else, to just try to give you a sense of an introduction to the topics and contextualize them for you, and then let you refer back to the slide material at a later point when you realize that you want to understand a little bit more. Um, did I skip over the note? Well, I did too, didn't
Oh,
I?
no, I think it should be next.
Okay. At any rate, I am Leslie Daigle, and for the purposes of this group, the important parts of my background include the fact that I've been participating in IETF work since the mid 1990s. Um, in fact, I've been to all of the in-person IETF meetings since 1995, which makes me some kind of crazy. Apparently I've chaired 5 working groups. My notes say I've chaired 5 working groups. And then I was appointed to and for 5 years chaired the Internet Architecture Board, as well as the IAOC, the IETF Administrative Oversight Committee, which is no longer a thing. And I'm here this week because I'm chairing the MOPS working group, and you all want to come to the MOPS working group on Tuesday morning. Thank you. So here we are, the IETF Note Well, which I'm sure you've seen already a few times today. The things to note here as you read it again for the nth time, and you'll see it in every session this week, that there are expectations and policies that surround participation in the IETF, both in terms of conduct and in terms of IPR, which is one of the advanced topics. So when we get to that topic, we can refer back to this and think a little bit more about it. Okay, so one of the advanced topics is protocol registries. Any standardization work, whether it's here or at the IEEE or in any other technical forum, you may have already encountered this type of a topic, which is to say, when you create a protocol, perhaps there are numbers that are assigned to different contexts. So, for example, perhaps there are parameters or types. Types are a great example of things that have to get assigned. So once a protocol format has been agreed on, there may come a time, there may be some initial set of parameters that are agreed as part of the protocol. For instance, as I said, types. You may have media types in email, for instance, and when the media types were defined, there were maybe 3 known types of media that could be sent in email, because who would ever send video in email? That's crazy talk 30 years ago. But as time goes by, there may be the need to update the list of types or whatever protocol parameter. And that's done in the context of the IETF through the IANA considerations in every protocol definition. IANA being the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So that there are different, when you design a protocol, there are different ways that those parameters can get assigned depending on the protocol and the purpose. A number of protocols have things that are called experimental use assignments. So for example, if it makes sense in the context of a protocol that you're defining that maybe you want to deploy something locally, so you just need to use something for your local experiment, that would be an example of an experimental use. Some of the assignments need expert review. So one of the first working groups that I chaired was the Uniform Resource Name Working Group. And one of the parameters that we defined in that was namespaces. The whole point of URNs, Uniform Resource Names, was to allow different namespaces to use URNs to express themselves. So every time there's a new namespace, for instance, ISBNs in the book world, or ISSNs in the serial world, there had to be a definition of this is what this namespace uses URNs, or how it uses URNs. So that kind of an application would require expert review to make sure that there was a proper alignment of, yes, this makes sense to use ISBN in this context. So these are the different types of approval that any given protocol may specify for its parameters as it's being defined. And of course, if you have any deep just questions about IANA assignments, I'm going to refer them to Michelle, because she knows an awful lot about this sort of stuff. So switching gears entirely, another advanced topic is patents and similar IPR. This is the one that I said we'll come back to the note well, because there is an intellectual property rights IPR policy in the IETF that explains largely that you are expected to disclose any intellectual property that your company may have that pertains to a protocol that's under discussion. And when you're in the heat of it and discussing how are we going to establish this protocol so that it can be maximally efficient in transmitting or um, something like that, then you may know of different algorithms or techniques that are really useful in that context, and you may want to suggest them in the context of working group discussion. If you're suggesting them because your company actually has a patent or a similar IPR, you have to make that clear. So if it's an encryption algorithm, for instance, that your company has a patent on, you can suggest it in the working group, but you also have to make it clear that there is existing patents on the technology. The working group may then say, well, that's not interesting to us and we don't want to use it because it's encumbered. Or in limited cases, it may actually make sense to go ahead and use the encumbered technology. But the point is that it has to be publicly known and discussed within the working group and ultimately within the ISG to decide whether that's acceptable.
Leslie, do you want to take questions on the floor?
Sure. Yeah, I should have said that at the outset. I'm happy to take questions as we go along rather than trying to queue them.
Daniel Shu. So it says participants and their sponsors. What are the sort of, requirements if somebody else's patent is covering this?
Yeah. So if you know of technology encumbrance, you should share that. And I think this slide shows a little bit of the. Here are some of the disclosures that have been filed, so you can see some previous examples of the things that have been disclosed. And this slide, yeah, just namely that you have to disclose who holds the IPR and what it relates to. And key to the earlier point about the IETF may still move forward with using the encumbered technology, the licensing has to be, it helps to know what the licensing requirements are for that technology. I'm going to pause and see if there are other questions. Looks like there's a follow-up.
As a follow-up on that, how much due diligence do I need to do?
Yeah, so be as truthful as you can be as far as due diligence is concerned.
Is it not working? Yeah, it's doing the thing.
Okay, it's doing the thing. So while we wait for the slides to come back, the IETF is not going to go and hunt for details on the IPR. So the point is to be as clear as you can be and yeah, as open and transparent as possible. And I was trying to get to here. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, the IETF itself will basically, by encouraging this, the IETF will basically take it on face value unless it looks absolutely insane. And it turns out that when you make an IPR disclosure in a working group, you will have 30 other people who are looking at this and deciding whether or not they think that there is an issue here. And I'm optimistic that Harold is going to step in and give us some concrete examples. But before I let you do that, I just want to say I mentioned the note well in the context of this topic because this is why the note well statement exists. Well, it was the first reason the note well existed, which is to say even when you're chatting with colleagues in the hallway here, that's part of the IETF process. So you can't say, well, I didn't have to file an IPR disclosure because it was just a hallway conversation. Harold.
Yeah, hi, Rala, this is John. Anyone who, if I try to call myself a newcomer, people laugh at me. So the
Former
point,
IETF chair, by the way.
Yeah, the point that you should take careful notice of is the last one. Talk to your lawyer. If you have any doubt whatsoever about what to do when you know that about the patent and you are participating in a working group with where covered material comes up, talk to your lawyer. You might want to run out of the room. You might want to disclose immediately, or your lawyer might tell you to do something else. But you're bound by the rules as long as you participate in the IETF. And if you break the rules, like not disclosing a patent, you're exposing your company to legal risks, which means other companies might sue you. And no matter whether you win or lose, if you end up in the court, your lawyer will not like you. So be careful. It's expensive not to be.
Yes, thank you for that, Harold. So apparently this is also the section with all the uncheerful topics, but so sometimes, whether it's not just because of IPR, but for many other reasons, there can be a dispute about something in a working group, and appeals are what we use to help address it. So vigorous discussion in working groups is encouraged, all within the context of appropriate code of conduct. But sometimes decisions will be made and choices will be made by the working group chairs, and maybe you feel like you were shut down, or you know, did not have adequate attention paid to the points that you were bringing up and that you think are pretty imperative for the outcome of the protocol development. So in the context of the IETF, most choices, most decisions that get made in the context of a working group are going to be based on group consensus. The places in which individual decisions and group ballot decisions occur are largely in the context of the IESG. Individual decisions, some things are up to the discretion of a working group chair, but largely, as I'm sure you've heard several times already today, rough consensus and running code are what define good progress in the IETF. So there will be choices. That the role of the working group chair is to determine when the group has reached consensus, which does not always mean that everybody is happy about the outcome, but it is meant to mean that the overall predominant agreed best direction has been reached. So sometimes in the context of that, like I said, you're not happy, you feel like your point was not adequately heard, and you may consider that that the outcome is going to create a significant problem, that there's a technical error here, or you may think that the process was run poorly and that the rough consensus that the working group chair called was not in fact the way consensus went. So the whole appeals process is how we deal with these situations. An important point in this is that your very first step is to talk to the working group chair. And working group chairs are always ready, willing, and able to listen to concerns that the decision was made wrongly and ask them to reconsider if you can lay out a case. Now, this is not inviting you to say, well, I don't like this outcome, and therefore, let me ask again for the 10th time, because working group chairs will appropriately work to shut down people who seem to be trying to derail progress in the working group. So it's always going to be a fine line, and this is why we have disputes and a dispute handling mechanism. So if you've asked the working group chair to reconsider and they don't, and if you feel, for instance, that that was inappropriate, as opposed to, I mean, you're a perfectly rational person, you're not trying to slow down the working group, it's just that this has to be reconsidered, then the next step is to go up the chain to the responsible area director and say, I think there's a problem here in the working group, and there is a process for this. If it goes beyond the area director and the area director is still saying, no, this is fine, it's all normal, then you can formally appeal to the IESG and say, there is an issue here in this working group and there's a process for it. And then the rest of this is just going up the chain. From the ISG, it goes up to the IAB, which we'll talk about in a minute. And in a very few cases, the last stop on the appeals chain is actually the Internet Society Board of Trustees, which you may or may not have heard about so far in the discussion of the IETF. But you can know that they know about as much of the day-to-day operations of the IETF as you know about their day-to-day operations, and they really don't want stuff to land on their desk. So there's a fair bit of effort to make sure we never have to go that far up the chain. Yeah, so here are some sample appeals and the process that went from the ISG up to the IAB for resolution, and it's all documented publicly. So yes, the IAB. It's not the Internet Advertising Board. It is the Internet Architecture Board. And from 86 to 92, it was the Internet Activities Board. And if you stick around for long enough, you'll hear somebody mutter the word Kobe. There was the Kobe incident when much of the IETF got restructured, and that was when the Internet Activities Board became the Internet Architecture Board. So it's it too is defined by an RFC. There is a charter, and it is chartered as both a committee of the IETF and an advisory body of the Internet Society, which is the previously mentioned Board of Trustees. So it's responsible for architectural oversight, which is why you will see they have open office hours this week for how to approach proposing new work. So they are involved in their own technical programs and workshops, as well as helping the ISG with evaluating the outcomes of birds of a feather sessions. And then some administrative stuff in terms of the confirmation of appointments and the appointment of an Internet Research Task Force chair. There's a new one starting this week, and many other appointments, as well as being responsible for interfacing with other organizations, and that's the liaison coordination role. And as we've just seen, the IAB has a role in process oversight and appeal. So this week, when you go through the working groups, you're going to see a lot of intervention from the ISG, the area directors, working with the working group chairs, helping progress work. And you may or may not actually be aware of seeing an IAB member in action. So at the end of the week, you may find yourself wondering, so what does the IAB do anyway? And if that is your reaction at the end of the week, just know that you're not alone in that sense. And it's not because they're not doing anything. Again, as you saw in my bio slide, I was on the IAB for some 7 years and chaired it for 5. I know it does a lot of work, but it's not very visible as part of the process of working group chairs, of working groups and protocol development, which is important, but maybe not in obvious ways. So here's some of the recent work they've done. They've got a few programs that they're running now, which is looking at some of the sort of larger architectural issues facing the internet protocol development. And then have published a number of RFCs. The IAB cannot publish protocol specification except by going through the IETF process. So it's not the IAB RFCs tend to be informational or experimental. So the IRTF, I mentioned a moment ago, the Internet Research Task Force. So it's yet another blob in the blob picture. And it is a group, it is essentially a group of research groups that are approved by the IRTF chair that the IAB appoints. And here are the current 16 RGs. The thing that's important about the IRTF and the research groups that it forms is that a research group is much broader, whereas you already know that a working group is formed with a very particular charter that's very specific about what protocol work it's going to do and when it will declare success. A research group is much broader and is often looking at things from the standpoint of what happens if, or what's the research ongoing in this topic. So for instance, there's a congestion control research group at the moment, and they're focused on what are the impacts and implications of different approaches to congestion control. It's not, let's find the next best congestion control protocol or congestion control algorithm and include it in a protocol. It's, let's talk about what the impacts are of different approaches. You may also, if you go to a BOF session this week, you may hear people saying, I don't think this is a working group. I think it should be an RG. That's a typical sort of deflection mechanism when something doesn't seem to be crisp enough in terms of a problem statement, then maybe it's a research group. And then you'll get to see the IRTF chair standing in the mic deciding whether or not it actually is reasonable for a research group. And we seem to have another question.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Dr. Jnana Jayaraman from Savitha University, Chennai, India. The last point, supplementary code of conduct covering academic integrity and research ethics more, right? How do you integrate with the institution by any memorandum of understanding or any particular task to given to the research students or any undergraduate students to developing their policy of IRTF?
So I'm afraid I think the acoustics in here are a little difficult. I didn't catch all of the specific point. I understood you were asking about the implications for students participating in research groups. Yeah. So the point in the last bullet is that while we've just gone through some of the code of conduct and the IPR rules for the IETF, that the IRTF is a different organization and has its own similar but slightly different rules. And I will admit I'm not familiar with what they are at this minute, but they are on the IRTF website. If you want to dig into them and see if you have a specific question to follow up with, I'd be happy to talk about it offline. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So here are some sample RFCs that were published by research groups recently. And as the previous slide noted, these are all informational or experimental. Again, informational or experimental RFCs are meant to indicate that they haven't had the same kind of open expert review and consensus that a standards or BCP document would. So the nominating committee, another sort of semi-random topic. I think you've already seen this blob diagram, and by now you've maybe traced figures on it or made happy faces or something, as one would be tempted to do with such a colorful blob diagram. The NOMCOM is responsible for appointing various roles in this diagram. So most notably, it is responsible for appointing area directors, including the IETF chair, the general area director. It is responsible for appointing trustees, some of the trustees to the IETF trust, some of the LLC board members, and yeah, so it's responsible for a number of appointments here. The NOMCOM itself is made up of volunteers. So anybody who has been to some number of IETF meetings in the last 2 years is eligible to be to volunteer for the NOMCOM. And then by random number selection, the whatever dozen or so members of the NOMCOM are picked every year. The NOMCOM chair is appointed by the Internet Society every year and is responsible for making sure that the NOMCOM process runs. So the NOMCOM process is not open the way the rest of the IETF process is because we're talking about personnel matters, right? The aim is to try to find the best people to fill the roles that are open, but it is in so doing, it is a time to surface issues if you think somebody is particularly suitable for a role. You know, I think this person would be an excellent candidate for that area director. Or if you are aware of things that should be considered so that somebody is not put in a position. And those are not the sort of things that you really want to spray around on a public mailing list, which is why the NOMCOM process is sort of one of the most, well, one of the least open processes in the IETF. I think that that's probably about as much as you want to know about the NOMCOM just this minute. Other than, yes, this is what I said, 10 members, and each of the bodies to which the NOMCOM appoints members has a liaison to a non-voting liaison to the NOMCOM, the point of which is just to make sure that the process is running smoothly and the considerations of their committee are taken into account. So I mentioned earlier that the IAB can seem a little bit opaque. It's a bit of a challenge when the NOMCOM is trying to find people who will be appropriate appointees to the NOMCOM, to the IAB, if they don't really understand what the IAB does. It's a lot clearer to people what the IESG does because you're working with them all the time. You know, they are or are not approving your documents and your working group proposals. But the IAB can be a little bit more opaque, as can the IETF trusts and maybe the IETF LLC and the ISOC and MOUSE. Yes, and I should, in all honesty, since I was a moment ago more or less encouraging you all to volunteer for the NOMCOM when you are eligible, I should be clear that they do an enormous amount of work, and they have a pretty tight timeline every year to run through the process. From in May or June, we'll know who the NOMCOM chair is, and they'll set up the call for volunteers and selection and so on and so forth. But one of the important pieces of that approach is that the community, that is everybody who participates in the IETF, and congratulations, that now includes you, is able to not only do its own work, but also coming together as a group of people, we can define our own leadership and structure. So the IETF is built by volunteers and driven by volunteers. And this quote, make the internet work, this is the mission of the IETF, to make the internet work better by producing high quality, relevant technical documents that influence the way people design, use, and manage the internet. And Harold, I almost remember when you came up with that. So to meet that mission, you, by participating in a working group discussion, are volunteering your expertise to help achieve the mission, right? You probably got on a plane and came here this week because you've got a particular protocol or a couple of protocols that you're interested in helping move forward. And you may have some pretty clear ideas of what you want to do with that protocol when it's done. But really what you're doing is contributing your expertise to make the world a better place, at least in the internet. And that's one of the things that actually makes the IETF really, really strong, is that it focuses on being open to all available expertise to come to the right collective decision, as opposed to having, for instance, a one company, one vote approach to making decisions about how to move forward. So it's not just for protocols. It is also over the course of the 30 years that I've been participating actively in the IETF, it's gone through, I think, at least 2 major shifts in terms of how its leadership, and I don't mean the ISG, I mean the structural, the administration leadership has evolved. And the approach to achieving those changes is just the same as making protocols, which is to say, it takes the community bringing its best expertise to bear about what will actually make the IETF a better place to actually achieve those changes. So in 1995, when I first started participating, there certainly wasn't an LLC. The IETF was not an organization at all. And money was collected by the organization that was offering to provide the secretariat services for the IETF, but that was, there was no visibility into what was being done. So the first step was to change that to a more open process where the IETF collected its own money. And then most recently, the IETF again decided that it was time to become formally an organization and created the LLC, all done in an open process and documented in RFCs. So hopefully that gives you a sense of sort of the power of the approach of bringing people together and having open discussions and managing open discussions to achieve joint outcomes, and documenting it publicly and transparently. And I think that's it for my advanced topics. So any other questions? I see somebody's in queue.
Hi, this is Prasad from Cisco. I was just curious if we have any statistics available to find out how many IPRs are referenced in the RFCs or how many IPRs kind of became RFCs or drafts.
Yeah, so I don't have statistics on that off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that there are statistics that are collected. I saw Jay in the room earlier. I don't see him now. Okay, Jay, are there statistics you know formally collected? There are not, or you don't know. Trying to interpret the head shakes. 2 for yes, 3 for no.
Jay Daly, IETF Executive Director. So nobody looks at it. The data is there.
Okay.
Definitely the database structure will have it, but I don't believe anybody has ever pulled it out to look at it. So.
Right. So, and I guess I might ask you a return question, which is what prompted the question or?
No, I was just curious. I was also wondering if it's because there are some ideas I have which could be IPRs. I was just curious.
So
what's the process? Like, should I file an IPR, then make it a draft? So
I think Harold's I interpret Harold to be wanting to follow that up.
So there are 6,575 disclosures as of current, as I count the data tracker. And if you have an idea and disclose it to the public, you cannot patent it afterwards. So if you're thinking about going the patent path, don't say anything about it in the IETF. If you want to cooperate with the IETF, that's, in my opinion, a much better thing to do. But then you have closed off the patent path. Consult your patent lawyer for details.
thank you.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, you have the slides that will be useful reference going forward. And if you have anything else that occurs to you through the week, I'm happy to answer if you buttonhole me in the hallway. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. We're going to take just a short, quick break and get ready for the next presentation, which will be all about internet drafts and RFCs.